Hello, everyone. It's once again my pleasure to bring a very important guest to this discussion this evening, because it's really always my desire to bring to this space someone who's done such tremendous work with their career, because it is my hope that in doing so, we can all be better people, ready to contribute whatever we can to making sure that we continue to live in a place that we can be proud of, in a world that we can be proud of. And it is always my desire to ensure that the people that I bring to this space are the people who really believe what I believe, that we all have a responsibility to contribute our best, not just the minimum, but our best to ensuring that we are able to live a world that is better than the one that we met. I understand that that's a very big challenge, but doing that the best way that we can, is really something that I always crave. And for me, the way to do that is to have discussions with people who know a lot, and not just, and I bring them not just because of what they know, but because of what they do. And today, my guest is Warren Graham, who is the Assistant Dean of Practicum Education and is also Clinical Associate Professor in the Stony Brook University School of Social Work. He is now the President-elect of the National Association of Social Workers, New York State chapter, as Board of Directors, and he's the President-elect, and it's going to be the full President very soon. So when I say that Warren and I can be talking all night, that is because there's so much to talk about. And in addition to overseeing practicum education at Stony Brook University, he co-chairs the curriculum committee and committee on professionalism and teaches in both the undergraduate and graduate programs in the university. He has been active as an educator, a forensic evaluator, and clinician for more than 20 years as a licensed social worker, and also as a credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor. As an advocate for social justice and human rights, Warren Graham has authored publications that speak to the need for inclusive human rights in the pursuit of social justice, retributive and restorative justice, human rights defenders, and he has done a lot of work that examines race, law enforcement culture, and social work practice, power, privilege, and oppression in microaggressive environments. And it's always my pleasure to speak with you, Warren. And it's sometimes I really get confused. I don't know if I should describe you as my friend, my colleague, or my brother.
All three.
All three. And you know too that I always I like to hang out with people who are very brilliant. And you are one of those. And I thank you. And Warren is also a PhD candidate at Adelphi University. And he brightens every space that he walks into. And I'm very happy to call you my friend, my brother, and my colleague. And today I will start by asking you uh, how you decided to become a social worker and why.
So first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm always humbled, whenever we speak. You talk about responsibility, to contribute, and I do believe, and I know you believe it as well, that we all do have a responsibility, and we should be held accountable to the world around us. So, we have to do what we can when we can in order to make a difference. Um, so I don't I came to social work by accident. You know, I always wanted to be a helper. That was never a question. I always wanted to be a clinician. That was never a question either. But I didn't know that social work was a profession. I didn't know that social work was an option. I didn't know social work was a vehicle for change until my last semester of undergrad. I was a psychology major at Old Westbury, and I had it in my mind I was going to be an FBI profiler, because I've always wanted to be a student of behavior. I always wanted to really investigate, why do people do the things that they do? Um, I've been active researching my family tree for over 20, 25 years. And there were medical issues. There were things that are pervasive that I see generationally. And one of them is substance use. So it was always a question, how is it that substances can impact individuals' lives, affect families, affect communities in the way that they do? What is it about the reliance on this thing, that um, affects their behavior, to the degree that they can neglect family, not show up, and things like that. So that was my plan, until my advisor asked me what I wanted to do with my life and what my plan was, and asked me one question, which really proved to be pivotal. My advisor said, "Do you think that people's behavior can be influenced by the environment?" And I thought for a moment. I said, "Absolutely." I know many wonderful people who, through no fault of their own, but because of the environment they were in, went left instead of went right. So my advisor said, "You don't want to be a psychologist. You want to be a social worker." And I said, "What's that?" Because my Long Island middle class privilege um, allowed me not to know what a social worker was. Right. So I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what the career outlook was for social worker or social workers. So it was my advisor that put me on this path of kind of exploration and self discovery. And once I researched it, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be able to be a part of change at a micro level, work with communities at the meso level, and work with large scale, overarching policy issues at the macro level. So that's how I applied to Fordham Universities for their Graduate School of Social Work. And simultaneously, I was working a job overseeing Nassau County's adult drug treatment program. So at the same time I was actually in school, I was actually applying what I was learning in the classroom with the people and the systems I was working within.
You said one thing that I think we need to focus on. Well, multiple things. One is like to understand that journey as it relates to substance use treatment, substance use disorders generally. But I actually, first of all, want to address what you talked about when you said, or what you meant when you said your Long Island privilege made it possible for you not even to know what social work is. Because what's interesting about that is that where is that we're at a point in society now where there's a significant need, for social workers across the country. Perhaps because we're knowing a lot more, but also because of what you describe as the privilege of not knowing. But I like if you would expand on that.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting when we think about social workers. When I see social workers now and how they're characterized or portrayed, it's usually child welfare workers. It's usually someone on SVU, grabbing a baby out of some woman's arms. Um, but even that characterization was unfamiliar to me. W.E. Du Bois, talks about this idea of dual consciousness or double consciousness, right? Like what is it to be a black man in a country that doesn't respect black people, right? So, I feel like in along the same vein, here I was part of a marginalized community, but yet I didn't experience all the things that most marginalized communities experience. There was no poverty, there was no homelessness, um, there was no CPS or ACS, involvement, but things weren't easy. So it's interesting that the challenges I did have, there were definitely points in my life I could have benefited from a social worker, just not the kinds of social worker usually connected to, attached to impoverished or marginalized communities, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. And for me, I actually came here from a faraway country. And it was also a country where there was a significant degree of privilege. So you just solved a puzzle that I have had as far as my own life. How come social work found me instead of me finding social work?
Mhm.
Because I also didn't know what social work was, when I came here. I had no clue what social work was. And then I think that not knowing and now not only knowing, but also practicing in the field must give you some sense of responsibility. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do feel, especially around that privilege piece, like for whom much is given, much is required. I do feel it's my responsibility, to give back. And now that I know the depth and breadth of social work, now when I look at my life, when I look at my relationships, when I look at my friends and my families, I'm like, huh, I'm seeing all the different ways in which social work can be helpful in all of these spaces. And knowing what I know, I'm in positions to connect people to services, connect people to the things that they need just to experience life better. So it's definitely a blessing.
Do you find that some of your colleagues, my colleagues in academia, don't really remember that they're social workers first?
Yes. I'm like, is that a trick question? Well, I don't I don't know if some of our colleagues even identify as being social workers, right? So in my my dissertation is around the integration of social justice in anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in social work education with an emphasis on field education. And one of the things that I'm finding is that not all of the students who are sitting in these seats want to be social workers. Social work is just the most expedient path to a whole other career that they would like, uh, a a method of service delivery in social work, but they don't want to necessarily be identified with social work and identified as a social worker. There's a lot of stigma attached to social workers. um, there may not be as much pride in being a social worker in some of the other career aspirational choices that some of our colleagues and students sitting in the seats now kind of are looking for. It isn't sexy to say you're a social worker, but it may be for someone to say I'm a psychotherapist. And there's nothing against psychotherapy, right? There's a need for clinicians who can operate at that level, but to be a social worker is a very specific career choice that is both as broad as you want it to be, but can be as specific as you need it to be as well. So being taught how to work with individuals, families, communities, organizations, from the smallest level up to the largest level, understanding human behavior and integrating policy and research and practice all at the same time. I feel like that's a special skill set, and a skill set that individuals should be proud of. So when I see that disconnect, um, between myself and what I believe and some of my colleagues, it's quite often because we don't believe the same things and we didn't go into this for the same reasons.
You started by talking about, you can tell that everything you're saying is music to my ears, and right, and you started by talking about wondering how substances, how and why substances abuse, affect people the way that they do. And you also try to explore, and your advisor also talked about the role of the environment. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the whole, really the fundamental uh, the explanation for what the psychosocial approach to what we do actually means. It really just means the individual, the environment, and the interaction between the individual and the environment. And that can cause a whole lot of issues and privilege and benefits and disadvantages. And when you relate that, to what you also have practiced, working with people with substance use disorders, I am wondering what the experience has felt like for you, because I'm imagining, because I know that in addition to being a professor at a prestigious university, you are also still in clinical practice. And you also look at social work from a macro lens. So I am imagining that in your classroom, just as I do, you do not have barriers between the micro and the meso and the macro. And so you can think of a social worker as a clinician, also realizing, because of what you and I think about life, that your client has not had food to eat. And so you might pick up the phone and cross that micro border and engage, the macro, even jumping through the meso. So I am thinking that because of all of these experiences and how you came into the profession, you are a better professor and a better clinician. But along the way, there must have been some experiences that have really stuck with you. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how all of these intersectionalities really, play out in your work and in your whole worldview of social work as a profession and social work practice.
Yeah, so there were definitely moments, over the years that really stood out that allowed me to connect more pieces of the puzzle actually together. So one of the first I would think is, my experience in Nassau County drug treatment court. I had a client, I was working with a client who was doing really well progressing through the program. And was at the point, it was a 12 to 18-month program, with, different phases, and there were awards for going from one phase to another, abstinence program, compliance. Those are, kind of things that would allow you to move from one phase to another. And as I'm talking about how wonderful the client is doing, and they're about to get their children back, and they're going to put all this behind them, the client said, "Put it behind me." Um, I'm going to a program. I'm showing up here to court, every other week or once a month, but I'm going back to a community where I can knock on the wall of my apartment, and in 20 minutes, someone will be at my front door with drugs. So that makes moving furniture, it makes play fighting with my kids, it makes everything look different. Because as I'm trying to live clean and sober, if I accidentally bump the wall, do I necessarily want to be triggered by someone knocking on my door? And, that really hit me hard. And that's the first time I really thought about the policy limitations, in my program and in other programs. Um, how is it that we aren't taking people who are triggered by their communities out of the actual community, but yet expecting them to change their behavior, right? So that was one of the moments that really hit me hard. I could think of another one. At years later, we implemented a juvenile drug court program, and this is also probably a good example of that intersectionality that you mentioned. And we did a lot of planning. We had a grant from the Reclaiming Futures Initiative to all simultaneously start this juvenile drug court program, using this evidence-based model. It was fancy, it was new, it was going to change the lives of adolescent substance users on probation in Nassau County. um, and based on the number of juvenile delinquency and persons in need of supervision filings, we had a pretty good snapshot of exactly who it is we were going to be working with.
Hmm.
And I think it looked like a 15-year-old Black male from some of the most marginalized communities in Nassau. A year later, fast forward, the populations we were getting were 16 or a 17-year-old white children from some affluent communities in Nassau County. And it was just happenstance that all of a sudden we looked, we're like, wait a minute, how did we wind up here? Because we had grant funds, we were infusing grant funds in certain communities, but yet these are not the communities that clients are coming from. And I was having this conversation with an attorney for the child. They used to be called law guardians. And the law guardian said, I don't refer my, my young Black men to your program. And I said, well, why not? Because I'm thinking in my head, this is the exact population that this program was designed for. And the law guardian, who was also a woman of color, said, I'm not going to refer them to the program because one of the legal benefits is having their cases sealed and expunged. And if all they're going to do is catch a new case, then what's the point? So for me, the idea that a law guardian or attorney for the child, whose responsibility is to be the legal advocate, um, doesn't necessarily maybe not believe in the work that they're doing, or not avail all of their clients to the same opportunities and legal benefits and the benefit of kind of accessing the resources available in this program was mind blowing. And she was a woman of color talking to me, a man of color. And the idea that privilege, that this was a benefit only afforded privileged clients from privileged communities was mind blowing. So for me, that's how kind of privilege and intersectionality started to kind of be introduced into my work. Unfortunately, it was too late in the to do anything about that. Not only the mindset or perspective of that law guardian, but also the direction that the program was already going in. It's been interesting thinking about that intersect of race and gender. You know, Close to 87% of social work are white women. So I'm often the only Black man in most of my spaces. Um, and I've been on the receiving end of implicit bias and race-based microaggressions um, at the hands of social workers. you know so I'm thinking, I learned about social justice and human rights and anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion before it was required in CSWE's educational policy and accreditation standards. So I would assume that some of my colleagues learned the same things. So why are they treating me negatively, because of my positionality, because of my identity? And then I learned, we as social workers, we are also representative of the communities that we come from. So our communities are socializing some of us to hold on to these beliefs, no matter what it is we're being taught in the schools. So this is a constant lesson that I'm constantly being shown. And it's really challenging. It makes the work difficult at times.
It does indeed, because you have to think of all of these things. But uh, I would say to you that, and I don't even think this is arguable. I said many years ago that when you look at the defense mechanisms that we teach and that we use in our work, and you pick out of those mechanisms, for example, displacement, that there is probably no bunch of people that will use a displacement as a defense mechanism than social workers. And I will say, more specifically now that I know even more than when I first said that, social workers of color, because you're supposed to deal with all of these issues. See someone who looks like you, who is being shafted by the system. And sometimes you feel helpless. And sometimes you deal with some of the things that you've just talked about with colleagues. and then go on as if nothing happened. Because you still want to be able to maintain a sweet face when you see your young children, right? And when you see your colleagues and when friends and family call you, you still want to be able to answer the phone and just go on as if life is just good. So, but since you brought that up about what it's like to be a person of color in some spaces, in some professional spaces, I want to ask you two questions in one. Um, the first of that bundle of questions is, why did you decide, it seems like you're a practitioner at heart, but I can't even say that because you have written and published so much, that I can't even say you're a practitioner at heart. I think I should just say you're a scholar practitioner, right? And so when and why did you decide to go into academia? And what has the journey been like for you as a Black man in academia?
So, as with everything in my
Should I
life,
withdraw the second question?
no, you're
Okay. Right.
trying to get me in trouble. No, I'm kidding. Um,
Well,
no, so as with everything in my career, everything has been, orchestrated by a higher power, right? All of my steps have been ordered when I look back, at it. Um, so I didn't necessarily want to go into higher education. So, 2011, there was New York State layoffs. First time in 30 years that there were layoffs in the court system. So I lost my job in Nassau County to someone else in the same role, but in another court building who had a year and a half more seniority. So at that point, I'm thinking, wow, what am I going to do? After 7.5 years, I envisioned a whole different type of path and trajectory now that's upended. So the first position I worked with after that was working with the hungry and homeless, which allowed me to work with those individuals that are invisible to most people, right? And then I worked for an outpatient mental health um, agency that provided high needs clinical services to children and adolescents. Um, and I was like, huh, okay. So I was doing more work in communities. There was some clinical work, and I'm like, okay. So I felt like getting back to kind of my roots instead of a supervisor and overseeing case management. Now I'm actually doing the thing. Um, but that was a grant funded program. So when the grant was ending at some point, I was talking to my mentor, Dr. Charlene Lane, who was one of my MSW professors, and she said, "What do you think about teaching?" Right, and I said, "Teaching." I said, "Professor, I don't like public speaking. Why are you trying to put me in front of a class of students?" So now I'm struggling with imposter syndrome. Like, what, me? Like, who would be foolish enough, right, to hire me to do anything, right? Because I'm silly at heart, right? Um, and I said, no, no, thank you. And she said, well, too late. I put your name forward. Someone's gonna call you. So now I felt this obligation to my professor, right? That, clearly she sees something in me that I don't see in myself. So if somebody does call me for this job, I'm gonna follow through and see what happens. And I wound up in the classroom, and it was teaching a class on diversity and oppression and clinical social work from a global, utilizing a global perspective. And not only did I enjoy teaching and being a part of students' process, but that's when I started to hear comments from students about representation, right? On how it was important for them to see me as a Black man in front of them in the classroom, because in their professional circles, they're not seeing that, right? But their clients look like that. So So now this idea of representation. So now I felt almost an obligation to the larger community to stay in the classroom and to sharpen my skills so I can be a better educator. And at some point I said, you know what? I think I want to work in academia full time.
Mm.
So a position in field education opened up at the Silverman School of Social Work at Hunter College, and I applied, and that was my kind of foray into full time institutional work. And at that point, I said, you know what, I don't think I want to leave, because to be effective as a clinician requires a certain set of skills and training. Um, but the issues that plague some of our clients are not superficial, right? Some of we have to deal with the policy violence, that allows individuals to languish, allows people to be in pain, that does not that puts up barriers so that they don't access the resources and the services that they need. Um, so being in academia and being in the classroom and being in field education, connecting these students to these experiential learning opportunities was a great marriage between all of the things that I knew kind of were not only impactful, but areas of social work that kind of needed that support, who needed people who were serious about change. And I've been in academia now for this year will be 10 years full time, in the classroom for 13.
Are you deliberately avoiding the second question?
No,
What it's like to be a
I
Black?
I'm a man of a certain age, so you're gonna have to remind me. Okay, what is it?
Oh,
What?
really? So are we going to talk about age?
Yes.
Or
So,
is that just a direct kick at
oh
the older brother here?
yeah. So I got it. What is it to be a Black
I
man?
was like, when you think of your journey in academia, what has it been like to be a Black man
Mhm.
in academia?
One of the first things I had to learn was the same issues that we see in the general population are also present in social work. And not just in community-based organizations, right? But also academia, the place that you would think is a sacred space for teaching and imparting knowledge to the next generation of change agents, can be the most racialized. So that's one thing I had to learn, was that not everybody who calls themselves a social worker or an educator or a professor, is actually in this for the same reasons that I am, who really has the best interests of the world, at heart. And trying to find ways to work across some of those divides. It's been challenging. I've worked with some racist social workers and educators who had no problems minimizing who I was, both as a student and as a professional. Um, so it's been challenging because I have to be mindful because I don't carry some of the same privilege as some of my peers. I have to be mindful of things like stereotype threat. So, I had a peer call me scary and intimidating one day, and I was thinking, no, that's a lie, right? Because I know, due to stereotype threat, there's a few things that I just never ever do in professional spaces. Like you never hear me raise my voice, right? Um, and that's a running joke in meetings because people say, Warren, you speak so softly. I need you to speak up. I need you to speak up. Because I'm always mindful on how me as a Black man, if I raise my voice, how other people are going to receive that or experience that. Um, so I try to avoid things that are going to affirm stereotypes for people. Um, so if you walk in my office, there are certain types of music you will not hear if I'm playing music. That doesn't mean I don't listen to it. That just means, I'm trying to control the narrative in that small way. Um, so not only is the work challenging, in and of itself, but it's also challenging managing other people's expectations, um, trying to limit the biases or um, identifying the microaggressions as they occur when they occur, trying to teach people at the same time who may be guilty of implicit bias but not know better. Um, it's exhausting. it's exhausting because this element of privilege, being a Black man, and people think I'm a lot younger than I am. So in some people's eyes, I'm a young or young-ish Black man. Um, so there's no way I can have, I can know what I know or have the experiences to contribute to this space. So it's been extremely challenging, as a Black man. And I absolutely think, based on some of my colleagues who are not Black men, it would probably be a different and easier experience if I shared another type of identity.
In just a few days, I will have the privilege of being in the same room with Nico Hannah-Jones. I I can't even imagine what that will feel like. But one of the things that I would like to ask her about is her experience, that whole story with UNC,
Mm-hmm.
how it felt for her. And especially thinking that she was a product of that university. She was good enough to get a degree there, but she wasn't good enough to come and be dean there. She was going to be the first person to be on that endowed chair that the board of trustees said you cannot give tenure to because of her skin color, as accomplished as she was.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be asking her about that in a few days when I see her. And yes, the 1619 project, when I see her. And I can tell you that what you just said resonate with a lot of people of color in academia. But I think that even in the corporate world, right? Like how we have to think multiple times before we say what we are about to say. We can't just blurt things out because, we have to be protective of our own image because we don't just represent us. For some reason, we represent our race, you know. And so it's like you have to think twice before you speak on subjects that people think is hot. And so very often we let our work speak for us. And I recall one time being in a space where, and this was at my old university, where someone said, and she was associate dean in the university, who said, for me, the most painful thing is meetings that I don't get invited to. And instead, they would invite my subordinates in her own department and in that my old university. And so just hearing her, and she, of course, is retired now. But those are, so when you said it is exhausting, I don't think there's a better characterization, you know.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I can absolutely resonate, with your colleague, your retired colleagues, experiences, right? Because, I've had some of those experiences, not at my current institution, but elsewhere. Um, and you have to, that feeds that imposter syndrome. It feeds some of the self doubt, and if we're not careful, because also in, a lot of Black communities, we're just now starting to understand the importance of, let's say, engaging in our own counseling and therapeutic process. So you're on the receiving end of all of these things, and in the clinical spaces, right? The clinical milieu still doesn't consider racism, and the effects of racism and all, as almost like a diagnosable issue, right? So what it looks like is depression, what it looks like is anxiety, what it looks like is all these other things, but at the core of it is these very racialized experiences and how we're being treated. So how do we get people to understand that these experiences are damaging, these experiences are pervasive, they're hurtful, they're extremely impactful, and on an intergenerational level, right? So Dr. Joy DeGroy in her post-traumatic slave syndrome, like she lays out what this looks like generation to generation. So it is extremely complicated, and what we know is space academia, which I used to think was a bastion of free intellectual thought, where you can engage in this high level critical thinking with like-minded individuals. I just imagine a group of philosophers sitting around a table pontificating, right? Um, and what I'm finding is it may be that for some people, but for especially women of color, academia is not a safe space. In the last 6 months, we've seen administrators commit suicide at the hands of being bullied by college presidents. We've seen Dr. Gay resign, on the receiving end of death threats just for showing up to do the job that she was actually hired to do. And there are countless other examples on how these spaces are just not safe. They're not cultivating safety. And at some point when we think about what do we do about that, it's not just, and proponents of ADEI will say, oh, we have to fix our hiring practices. No, it's not just hiring, it's retention as well. I can hire a diverse candidate, but if I don't support them while they're here and they leave, I'm just going to sit back and go, well, we hired someone of color. It's not our fault they left. So there's a lot to this. So Nicole Hannah Jones, her experience, is unfortunate, but thankfully, those kind of experiences get publicized, so that we can actually talk about it, so we can understand that this is the thing that real people are experiencing. And our road to academia, our road to the ivory tower, it's a lot harder than most. So when we get there, to then be marginalized and minimized, is a tragedy.
It is a tragedy indeed. And it's interesting that you went beyond social work, which reminded me to say that that associate dean that I was talking about, who made that comment at my old university, was not in social work. And, so which really just goes to show how pervasive, that experience is. And I know that you did ask a question a few months ago, maybe about 2 months ago, when you said, was the whole thing really about Dr. Gay, Claudine Gay? And we can have that discussion. But what I want to actually bring that to is the fact that some of your writings that I have read include the experiences of people of color with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And so as we have this discussion about people of color in high places, it's almost as if they're not treated much better than the people of color who have to deal with law enforcement and a criminal justice system. So how do you compare those experiences?
How do I compare the experiences of being black in law enforcement and black in academia?
Correct.
Uh, um, there's definitely a parallel, you know, where, and in either space there's a ceiling, and I come from a law enforcement family. My siblings have been police officers, state correctional officers, city corrections, worked in the courts. My stepfather was deputy warden, at a New York facility. I come from this space, and I've also seen how policy and how race and racism plays a part in the experiences of law enforcement and blacks in law enforcement very specifically. There's what you're trained to do, right? There's your patrol manual, which kind of outlines the policies and the rules, right? And then at some point they're going to tell you to close the book, right? And they're going to verbally say, this is how we do things, right? So there is a parallel that, depending on who you are, you may not reach the heights that you are capable of, that you should reach, that you're qualified for, just because of your identity, just because of your race, because of your gender, and the intersectionality of all of that. So it's really no different, you know. You at I would say for law enforcement, chances are, you're still socialized to see the people you're interacting with, the communities, the the potential perpetrators. You're programmed, you're socialized to create an image in your head on what those people look like in any given community, right? And they're probably going to be the same young Black men that I was trying to help in our juvenile drug court program. So there's a parallel between that and the ways in which young Black men are treated in academia as students. I came from an organization, an institution where there was an academic review committee which met to discuss issues of student conduct. If it violated, kind of like the policies around student professionalism, or if there was a danger for that student to actually finish their academic studies. And the people coming before the committee, the students, were disproportionately Black men. So, and they would, comments would come out in those spaces like, he was referred because the instructor didn't feel safe around him. Well, what does that mean? Behaviorally, what did he do? Did he jump up on a table and yell and scream? Did he try to rip his shirt off like Hulk Hogan? Was he throwing furniture around? What did he do? No, it's just the way he made me feel. So what I'm hearing is he didn't actually do anything. There are no behavioral indicators to lean on to say, this is why I felt afraid. So when you start to strip all of these things, the only thing that appeared to be left was race. And, much the same way when we think about law enforcement, we think about things like the Rockefeller drug laws, which disproportionately affected, let's say Black cocaine users, instead of powder cocaine users. Well, looking at the demographics, who is likely to use either one of those substances? When you strip everything down, it looks like race. So there's a parallel, there is a parallel, and that's what actually wanted me to do more in the field, to be more productive, to be productive in different ways. Every time someone said, hey, I'm thinking about writing this paper, are you interested? Yes, because I want to contribute to change in any way I can. In some ways, making those connections, that, in all of these different spaces, the constant is race. So if we aren't paying attention to it, it doesn't matter what sector, what sphere we work in, we're potentially denying people's kind of their individuality, their personhood.
Right.
We can't stick a band-aid on, like, we can't fix the thing if we don't name it.
We cannot fix the things without name, and even in clinical practice, we try to encourage our clients to name the experience. And so we must always learn to name things and also be bold enough to do that so that we can fix them. I know you do have a hard stop, but I also know that we can talk till tomorrow and still be talking. But just listening to you, and I know that one of the people watching us is a social worker in Texas who wrote, this is amazing. Yes, we do a lot, and we are always satisfied by helping people. Some people will say, maybe we shouldn't just be satisfied anymore, especially since I am speaking with the president-elect of the National Association of Social Workers of the NASW, the New York State chapter. And yesterday I was telling another social worker that the person I will be interviewing today is the president-elect of the NASW. And she said, please ask him what he can do about getting us paid better. We should be we are satisfied, according to the social worker in Texas, we are satisfied by what we do. Then there's the other social worker who is saying, please ask him what he can do to get us paid better.
Well, so interestingly, to that point, that's one of the actual legislative priorities, that we've been advocating for, is higher pay for social workers and really elevating the profession, to get more social workers in the schools, um, you know, to eliminate the barriers to getting social workers through the schools and into the communities that actually need them. There were already legislative priorities, across the country to really do that. So, you know, um, pay equity, that's a real thing, and everyone is, we're forcing legislators to actually look at it, and speak to it. So
So yeah, all right. I will be, anyway, she's going to see this if she's not seeing it already. So I will let her know that it's something you're working on. What do you see as the current and future trends in social work education in light of our country's political trends? If you look at the political trends and, where is social work currently and in the future? What do you see?
So when I think current trends, right, in 2022, CSWE updated the EPOS,
Yes.
Educational Policy and Accreditation Standards, so that it's a lot more directive, speaking about anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, its importance and its effect on some of the communities that we serve. So as a trend, I feel like that mirrors exactly what we're seeing on a national stage, this attention and focus on race and identity and other elements of identity, and how it's been marginalized, and how people do not feel safe, how people are not protected, across the country. So I think what we're seeing in the field really is going to mirror what we're seeing in general society. I think we are, the moment we start to see something going on, we're rallying to create ways to fix it, create ways to change it. Um, and in some ways it works, in some ways it doesn't. You mentioned there's a viewer here from Texas. I know in Texas, you can't say things like diversity. You can't mention words like equity or anti-racism, especially in schools of social work, right? Your funding will be threatened in Texas and other states. So that is a big deal. But so when we're thinking about trends, we're looking at social justice, we're looking at human rights. Um, I see another trend kind of moving from this very top-down authoritative approach to academic life, to academia. Uh, I think what we're starting to see is students feeling more empowered. There are student movements. Students have been rallying. Students have been protesting. I think the ways in which we used to see academia, where here the professor is speaking down to and teaching students, I think the playing field is being leveled, you know, so that we are partners in this process. We're partners in your educational process. Um, so I think that's also another trend, and just people fighting to be recognized. People fighting for their identity to be recognized because they matter. I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that globally. And so that has to be a part of social work, because that's a part of human rights.
I am an African man, and for us as Africans, and I'm sure you can relate, because the clock is really just an equipment, that you can use to decorate your space. It doesn't mean you have to follow the time, right? But I'm trying to make sure that that I follow the time and allow you to leave, because but only if you promise that you'll be back.
Wait, how do you do it? Trying to do the Scouts honor thing. Scouts honor.
Yes, on my honor.
Yeah.
so, and you are indeed an honorable man. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you took 1 hour out of your hectic time, to join us and have this conversation with me and with so many. Someone in Nigeria wrote that this is a great conversation. And I know the next thing is they'll be asking me, when is he coming to speak in Nigeria? But Well, you have already promised, so we are going.
Yes, yes, I did. So yeah, let's talk about when.
Yes, that is correct. So thank you very much. I can't,
Thank you.
again, thank you. And have a really great rest of the week. It's still early in the week. And continue to, I love reading your writings, and I love when academia sends me an email talking about talking about Warren's new publication. It makes me very happy, and I thank you. Please continue to do that.
Thank you very much for having me. I will, of course, absolutely come back. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversations, and I hope your viewers did as well.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.